Hi, everybody. Welcome. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us. We are here to discuss Meet Me in St. Louis, a wonderful musical that was suggested to us by our wonderful panelist and moderator and introduction maker extraordinaire, Jennifer Fleeger. Jennifer, how are you this evening?
I'm good. How are you, Andrew?
Fine, thank you. There is a lot to discuss with this film, but before that, a few ground rules. Please keep yourself on mute unless or until I call on you to ask your question or make your comment. I will know to call on you because you will raise your hand, as a couple of people have done already. There is a little raise hand function at the bottom of your Zoom window. Please use that, and I will try to get to everyone. I may not be able to get to you if you're raising your hand for a second time, but we'll try to get to everyone at least once. In addition, please feel free to utilize the chat window to talk to the other participants and also to let us know where you're from. If you are so inclined, we would love for you to drop us a bit of a longer note about where you're from. You can visit the Where in the World section within Film Studies Online at brynmarfilm.org and let us know where you're from if you're outside of the greater Philadelphia area. As you can see from the wonderful graphic my colleague Heather has created, we've had folks join us from all over the world and definitely from all over the country. So please, if you're one of those folks, let us know where you're from. We'd love to hear from you. I will mention that we will not be having a discussion a week from tonight, but we will be back starting the first Monday in January with a new run of discussions, the first couple of which will also feature Jennifer. So if for no other reason, you can sign in, join us for those, if only because, you know, with Jennifer joining us, it will be a stamp of quality and perhaps some sort of very performative introduction. I don't know if you saw, Jennifer, that already in the chat, people have been saying best introduction ever. So
I believe they also love your mustache, Andrew.
Oh, I didn't notice that, but you know, what can I say? I can't sing or choreograph or direct or make my family do much of anything at all. So thankfully Zoom lets me do this. All right, with that, we can get started. David, you have a question or comment?
I do, and good evening, and thank you. I'm good to be back. I took 2 weeks off with permission. Thank you, Andrew. As Andrew and I briefly discussed on email earlier today, I don't think I've ever had the experience of seeing a movie, getting ready for a film class, and opening up the Wall Street Journal that morning and having my movie for tonight be one of the quarter-page articles. Today's cultural commentary talks about Judy Garland's Good Tidings and sort of augments a few of the things that I was going to mention. I grew up in a family where my father sang, or more often whistled, many of the movie and show tunes from the 40s and 50s, and this is one I remember probably from when I was 10 years old, if not before. But the cultural commentary in the Wall Street Journal was really on point for some of Jennifer's comments and some of my own thoughts. When you took the words of the song and you took them from being placed in World War II when this was filmed, and you put them into COVID 2020, there's an awful lot that made this not only Jennifer's favorite film, as thank you for explaining all your 4 points, but so poignant and so 2020 for us. If you would, Jennifer, talk a tiny bit more beyond your introduction on Judy Garland and Minnelli. I had thought that they had some, not relationship in the sense of being married, but some film relationship prior to this. And I thought that, you know, it just came together. You know, she was his star, even separate from the young Judy. So thank you again. Great film. It's hard to always know your favorite, but when you open up a Wall Street Journal on the same day, Andrew, boy, you hit it out of the park.
Jennifer, did you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I have a couple of things to say. Thank you for all those comments. I think that the Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas song, I watched it again last night, the whole film once again, and we'll have to muddle through somehow line, which gets, augmented or taken out of later versions of it, thanks to Frank Sinatra. To me, that was the line that really hits home, because we hope next year it'll be better. And I don't know about that shining star on the bow, but we're going to muddle through this period. And the way that she sings that line, the way that Judy Garland always sings her line, is just piercing through right to your heart. There's just something about her as a diva when she performs, particularly for me in this and then in A Star Is Born, where you just can feel the pain in every fiber of her being as she sings in what seems to be such a natural way. So that's the moment that I felt like really connected to right now. And you're right that Minnelli worked with her on an earlier film on a dance sequence for one of Busby Berkeley's things, I think, or somebody else's anyway, and a couple of years earlier than this. This was Minnelli's third full film. He did Cabin in the Sky and a Red Skelton comedy. So this is the moment when he and Garland and the Freed unit at MGM all come together to create a drastically new and beautiful and colorful image for the big budget musical. And that's what we're seeing from this moment on.
Yeah, it used to be pretty common in the studio system, particularly in MGM, for there to be someone who separately directed the musical sequences, because they were, for technological as well as formal reasons, a bit different than the conventional dialogue, regular action part of the live action part of the film, and a number of directors who would go on to direct entire musical films began that way. Busby Berkeley did, and Minnelli did as well. The other thing I want to mention is, as Jennifer mentioned, Arthur Freed, the producer of this film. This is he was a very unusual figure in the Hollywood of the 1940s and 50s, because we think of, rightly and fairly, the studio system as being just that, a system where there were very few exceptions to the rules, very little autonomy, and very little sort of creative authorship or ownership. And when we talk about authorship, creative authorship, we tend to focus on directors, but one of the best cases for a producer of films being the author of those films is Arthur Freed, who had such a specific and successful and crowd-pleasing view and approach to making musicals, and he'd been involved in making them at MGM for about 15 years at least before this movie came out, first as a songwriter, and then sort of working his way up the chain to become a producer. He had his own unit. You will hear film scholars and film historians refer to certain movies as Freed unit musicals, and that refers to his production unit that operated with a fair amount of autonomy within a larger studio system. And if you think about what we saw in this movie, really dark moments like elements of the Halloween sequence, and even the melancholy that we were just talking about with Garland's singing of what's now become a Christmas classic, those are uncharacteristic for Hollywood studios in general, uncharacteristic for an MGM musical, but Freed had the autonomy and the open-mindedness to experiment with things. I mean, after all, this is the man who produced the Gene Kelly movies that had ballets in them, 10, 15, 20-minute ballets within a Hollywood narrative film. So he was open to those sorts of things, and he had a good eye for talent, and he was able to get wonderful results from that talent. I just want to read a partial list of the movies he produced to give you a sense of his accomplishments and really the tremendous impact he had on movie musicals for the time. Me and My Gal, 1942, This one, The Pirate, 1948, Easter Parade, 1948, On the Town, 1949, An American in Paris, 1951, Singing in the Rain, 1952, The Bandwagon, 1953, Brigadoon, 1954, It's Always Fair Weather, 1955, Gigi, 1958, another collaboration with Minnelli. And you can see a common thread that runs through these, which is in a very important element of the movie we're discussing tonight, which is nostalgia. Right? And which is the ability he has as a producer in picking material to say what from the past applies to this moment we're in now. He does it with Singing in the Rain, right? Which is about set in the era when Hollywood movies are going from silent to sound, made in the era when Hollywood, the film industry, has to get used to television, among other changes. So he's got a good sense for choosing, not just for nostalgia, for all of its sort of popular appeal that it has, and for allowing certain freedoms with costume and style and musical style and all that, but also for how it is a way to tap into something or make a comment on the present without sort of overtly making a comment on the present. Okay, that was a lot of talking. Sorry, everybody. Let's hear from you some more. Robert, you have a question or comment.
Yes, thank you. Would you please help me turn on the lights? That was a wonderful moment in the film when she wanted him to come in and help him turn off the gas lights or turn.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway,
turn them on so you can turn them off, right?
Yeah, I thought that was so touching. But I have two questions, very quick. The first is, this film was nominated for 4 Oscars, did not win. One of the nominations was cinematography. My first question, for a color picture, because at that time, they distinguished between color and black and white for the cinematography Oscar, apparently. So my first question is, what is it about the cinematography that is so special that it got a nomination for an Oscar? That's the first question. The second question is, this film was also nominated for music, the best musical scoring, and it was also nominated for the best song, the trolley song. However, it was not nominated for sound recording. And my second question to you is, why, if you get nominated for best musical score and the best song, how could you not be nominated for sound recording? Why is that a distinctive category? Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Robert. Jennifer, do you want me to tackle some of these, or?
I can speak to the cinematography and what's special
Great.
about it. I think there's a couple of things that are really interesting about the cinematography in this film. And one that people have noted a lot is Minnelli's mobile camera. And you notice it right at the outset, not necessarily in the ketchup scene, although there is some camera movement there. But when we have the pass along song begin and we follow Agnes up the stairs and then we follow Grandpa across the hall, there's a sense that the camera can move along with this family inside the house. Another sequence where this is done really well is the Skip to My Lou party sequence, where the camera is almost dancing with the family in the room and all of their friends. It moves through some of the square dance movements and things like that. So I think part of it is the mobility of the camera and the way that it works so well with the song sequences. But another aspect of the cinematography that's just so wonderful is the way that the color scheme of the mise en scène works with the color scheme of the lighting and the costuming all together, and how that gets shot and developed so that there's a marriage between these things. So we see that at one point in the movie really nicely when Judy Garland is sitting at the window looking into her mirror in her bedroom near the beginning, and she's wearing blue and yellow. And then behind her outside, we see this gorgeous blue and yellow reflection of the outdoors, just as a lighting effect. It looks almost Circean, which will of course come a decade later, but it's very much like a Cirque kind of color effect done with lighting and costuming all together. So I think that's one of the things that makes the movie special. Why it didn't win, I don't know the politics of the Academy Awards, but those things work really nice.
I would also add that despite the fact that it's clearly utilizing rear projection, I think there's a lot of really good work for the trolley scene as well. The way the camera moves around the trolley, and the way they sort of negotiate the, the sort of obscured views of people on the trolley and things like that. George Folsey Sr. was nominated for something like a dozen Oscars and never won one. So his work was always seemed to always be appreciated, and that might have something to do, might be part of a pattern there. Regarding the sound, I think that sound recording is not related to the recording of musical numbers. And in fact, in a way, it doesn't surprise me that a film that's a musical would not have been particularly recognized for that, because the songs are recorded separately, and they're not recording them live. They're not singing them live for the recording that we hear on the soundtrack while they're filming the image of the scene at this point in time, or really for much of Hollywood history. So in a sense, the recording of those songs was done in a more controlled and experienced environment than the sort of audio sound recording done on something that might be shooting on location, or that even might be capturing other sounds that weren't so specifically designed to be captured. So that, I don't find that all that surprising, given that bit of context. Let's see, William, you have a question or comment?
So yes, so I was trying to figure out why I love this film so much, and I think the answer is because it reminds me a lot of something like the Laura Ingalls Wilder books, where even though it sort of gives everything this nostalgic glow, it doesn't sugarcoat what childhood is like either. I mean, the child who buries her dolls, is just as morbid as some children are. The grief feels real and everything like that. And so I feel like it does this really good balancing job of balancing the rosy memories we have of our childhood with also some of the more unique elements of childhood that often is omitted in things. And so I was wondering if anybody's read the Sally Benson book it's based on, if it has a similar tone, or if this was more the movie and Arthur Freed and Vincent Minnelli's contribution.
I have not read any of the source material.
I haven't read the source material either. I do know that she did do a lot of the things that Tootie did. And I also know that a lot of the little stories that are taken from her vignettes, like the trolley sequence, was initially just a single paragraph in what she wrote. The authors of the film also eliminated all references to trips that the family took to Wisconsin, or a lot of the other characters and things like that, just to make the whole thing set in St. Louis and to keep it all there. That's all I really know about the books, but I really appreciate your comments about why you love the film so much and the idea of childhood, because you're right that children do often say and do a lot of really dark things. And it's easy to forget that. At the same time, I still think Tootie's a bit of a psychopath, I have to say. So.
Well, I'd forgotten. I remembered some of the stuff that happens on Halloween. I'd forgotten what they tried to do to the trolley. That is crazy.
And then those sisters just begin to laugh about it in the end, as if it's a big joke that they almost killed all of these people by putting a fake dead body on the tracks. It's horrible.
Right, because we wanted to see if we could derail the trolley.
Yeah.
Like, we wanted to see if we could down the airliner. Isn't that sort of on the same spectrum? It really is pretty grim.
But you have to, the line that they say in that scene is one of the best in the film, when they're talking about how how the neighbor was hiding them from the police. And the little one says, "Oh, no policeman pays attention to girls," as if it couldn't possibly be them. It's lines like that that are thrown into the movie that suggest this double level that this movie always exists on, which is that the undertone is really what it's about and not the kind of conservative overtone of nostalgia that we see. It's a balancing act between these things throughout. So.
Yeah, and I think there's another layer added by the fact that it is, if we do remember when we're watching it, that it's based on the stories, written by this girl when she's older, that throws another interesting lens over it, because of course things, everything looks bigger when we're little, and all those sorts of things. Certain things seem far more cataclysmic than they actually might be when we're adults. So it adds another layer as well.
Oh, that's a good point.
Meredith, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, hi. I think my question actually follows up on Williams. I mean, I think I'd never seen this movie, and it's why it hit me so much. I think the portrayal of Tootie in particular, and her anger. And I think she's one of the most rage-filled kids I've ever seen on screen. And so I was wondering if you could just talk about that, the portrayal of children, and how this fits in. I mean, I think I expect children to be a little bit like weird and uncanny, but that angry, especially at the end with smashing the snowman, just was really striking to me.
Well, I can say, well, actually, I guess, that question was asked of two people with young children, and particularly young sons, and I can say that I think that when I saw this movie, previous times I'd seen this movie before I had a child who's currently very close to his age, I probably found her behavior a lot more outlandish than I do now that I have observed the wild fluctuations of which a 5 or 6 year old is capable. And I also think that there's, one of the things about musicals that makes them difficult for some people to embrace, but also, to my mind, makes them so wonderful, but also gives almost every one of them a bit of by design, if not by intention, by design, a bit of camp, is that the very act of singing is sort of an announcement of a foregrounding, right? In most musicals, the singing is meant to express some sort of next level emotion that the character can't convey through the quote unquote normal means of the world of the film. And we see that from the beginning with Judy Garland's pining. And I think that Tootie's behavior is sort of kind of a related sort of opportunity, right? She can express the rage at leaving St. Louis that many others in that family feel, but are too, grown up or mature or have to set an example for their kids, et cetera, to act out on it. She sort of has a license to foreground the frustration that many of the characters are feeling. And the, kids and animals in movies are often given that license. And here she's given the license, and I think she uses it.
Yeah, I also think that that's another moment that connected to this contemporary moment really well for me, because watching my own children right now and the lack of control they have over their own lives and over the situation that's keeping them indoors all the time, I quite identified with Tootie's feeling in that moment. She just wanted to smash those snowmen because that's all she had. That's the only thing that was hers that she was allowed to smash, and the only part of her world that she could control and that she could build. And I feel like I'm looking at that a lot these days. So.
Yeah, and just to follow up on a question I saw in the chat, when Jennifer said mobile camera, or you hear us referring to mobile camera, we are not talking about a handheld camera. This movie was shot, you wouldn't have been talking about that with a 35 millimeter motion picture camera in the 1940s anyway. It would have been too heavy and cumbersome for that, but particularly because film was shot in Technicolor, which required a special camera that utilized 3 strips of film and was even bigger and more cumbersome. It was not handheld, and there really wasn't much, if any, handheld camera work being done. It wasn't sort of considered, by and large, considered part of, certainly not MGM's sort of glossy studio style. So no, just a camera that moves on a dolly or on a crane or through those ways. Barbara and Richard, you have a question or comment?
Thanks, Andrew. It's Richard. So I loved the film and appreciated the choice. The film to me had texture. It's not a word I usually associate with film, but the scenery, the decorations, to me, it sort of blended effortlessly into this kind of very rich sense of tapestry. There's two questions I was wondering if you could address, just to extend the sabotaging the trolley thing a little bit. The part where Tootie accuses John Truitt of attacking her, and then that kind of gets laughed off also, was, in a movie that I truly loved, was a hard thing to get around. So in addition to the other dark sides of Tootie, I was wondering if you might talk about that. In a larger context, I'm wondering about the role of studios and the choice of films during the war years. I was starting to think that they often fall into either the heroic or the heartwarming, not exclusively, but a lot. And I was wondering if you could comment on the role the studios played in the choice of what got produced and the balance, and whether one studio leaned more towards the Casablanca type of heroism, another studio leaned more towards the Meet Me in St. Louis, kind of like Oklahoma also, right, during the wartime. Just that sort of larger question, and the dark side of Tootie's accusation of being assaulted by an adult man.
Okay. Jennifer, any of those that jump out at you as points you'd want to tackle?
I also felt like you did, reading that scene today, and having them believe that John Truitt would beat up this little girl, and then reacting in the way that they did, just running over to the house and hitting him, and that's it. I mean, it's quite shocking. And the only way that I can kind of make sense of it is that the movie still pictures John Truitt and Judy Garland's character as youth, like they're high school children or something, and that's what makes this all at least somewhat kind of level. But you're right, there's nothing really we can do to make that better, I think. In terms of wartime production, it's true that studios had different ways of dealing with certain kinds of material. And as Andrew said, this had a lot to do with the units that existed at different studios for producing films. And the Freed unit then definitely focused on this kind of escapist, nostalgic musical quality. And I think here in particular, you can see what we're looking at in this wartime is the image of what we're fighting for, like an idea of America that exists in the minds of MGM that's then projected into this film that can be, sent out to the world right here in our own backyard, right here in St. Louis. This is what we can return to, this idea of the past. And of course, it's this nostalgic fantasy, but at the same time, I think that that's what we're trying to signify, a kind of dreamscape or a hope for the future. And to me, it makes me wonder what films produced now in this moment are going to project about the future for America now, what we're going to be thinking about those films 20 or 30 years later, and what they say about how we feel about hope or not.
I mean, I think I agree with everything you said. I think one complicating point is that the companies that produce motion pictures now view their mission very differently than the studios did back then. There's no question that the movie studios, and let's remember that by and large, it's not much more than a handful of companies run by primarily very powerful individuals who are making the overwhelming majority of the movies seen in the United States in the 1940s. And that's a difference from today. But also how those companies viewed themselves and how they viewed their audience is very, very different as well. It's no secret that the Roosevelt administration leaned on the movie industry to help it with its views or chosen approaches of how to first get out of the Depression and then how to win the war. That's what led to, among other things, there being some Hollywood movies in the early 40s that were very positive of the depictions of the Soviet Union. that, of course, would cause the industry trouble within the decade, further trouble within the decade. And they were all felt it. But, you know, I talk about, you know, I say the administration leaned on them. These studios run by these moguls, most of whom, not all of whom, most of whom were Jewish Americans who were at most one generation removed from being immigrants, were very eager to do their part and very eager to have their movies reflect their view of America. And I don't think it hurt that a positive, warm, nostalgic, uplifting view of the United States was good business at this time. But I also think there was some sincere view held by many of the people in charge of these companies that also that was reflected in that depiction. That being said, different studios had different approaches. And, you know, Warner Brothers made musicals and MGM made musicals, but they wouldn't exactly seem to strike the same tone. Warner Brothers made musicals like 42nd Street or the, you know, Yankee Doodle Dandy, the George M. Cohan story, which had, you know, varying degrees of hard scrabble elements to them, like many Warner Brothers movies did. That was that studio's sort of, you know, reputation or milieu. MGM was, you know, what is it, more stars than there are in the heavens. They were very polished and glossy and tended more toward the, you know, being warm and comforting. And so they all had that larger goal, by and large, of providing aid and comfort to a country under duress, but they went about it in different ways. I don't know that it would be fair to say that, you know, Warner Media today or Netflix or Viacom or whoever feels that they are in the business of comforting America or reinforcing the good things that most Americans already think about themselves. I think they would say that's what Hallmark and Lifetime are for. And they don't think that's their mission. And it's not because they're so, you know, smart or brave. It's because they don't think that's where the money is. They think American culture has changed sufficiently where they don't want that sort of comfort or reinforcement from their motion pictures. Now, I don't know that the evidence fully supports the extent to which they seem to have walked away from that being a profitable endeavor, but it seems by and large that they have walked away from it.
We also have to remember that everybody in 1944 is submitting scripts and final versions of films to, at this time, a variety of censorship bodies, one having to do with wartime information and the other one having to do with the code. So we're dealing with another level of sameness across the industry that doesn't exist now.
Right. In fact, at this point in time, the motion pictures don't enjoy First Amendment protection. So it is always possible, it's unlikely, but always possible that the government could do more than demand that scripts be submitted to those offices for approval and actually dictate what could and couldn't be shown in movies, because they were not considered forms of speech or expression or creative art or anything like that. So there's that added pressure too, to make sure that they are inoffensive. Lee, do you have a question or comment?
Well, I just wanted to say that it's not completely not relevant to what you're talking about right now, but the plot is really very weak in this movie. That it's really all on the family, and there's really no love story that means anything for either sister. The sisters are yearning and searching, but the men are completely sort of nebbish, if you like. I mean, there's no you know, they're sort of figures rather than really having active roles in the story.
Yeah, I think this is simultaneously the most heterosexual movie ever made and the gayest movie ever made at the same time, for exactly that reason. Because none of the relationships are anything that you would actually invest in or believe in or really care about at all, except for maybe the parents. And that's the one that brings the whole family together with the You and I song that they sing, and then everyone returns to the living room. But other than the parents, it's all a big show of performative romance, and it makes it incredibly gorgeous. But it, of course, constantly undermines the message, which is, Andrew pointed out at the very beginning about the Freed unit and their cohesiveness, and Roger Eden's role in the Freed unit. He was a composer and like second in command to Freed all these years. And he was gay, and many of the members of the Freed unit were gay. And so you can see a real gay sensibility coming through all of these MGM big, colorful productions. And I think it's evident in exactly what you're talking about right there.
But I also think, I mean, there are Freed unit musicals that are heavily invested in the romance, or at least more heavily invested in the romance than this one. I think part of the issue here is that this is really an ensemble film. I mean, Judy Garland's the big star, and Margaret O'Brien certainly is a focus. But there's a lot of characters in this. There's a lot of characters and a lot of relationships, more so than most musicals tend to have. They tend to focus on, in most cases, one man and one woman, and will they get together, and will their unification or reunification save the fairy tale kingdom of the movie studio or whatever it is? Will it bridge the class divide in England or whatever it is? This movie, that's not the point of this movie. This movie is very much about nostalgia. And very much the thing the romance we're supposed to care about is our romance for 1903, is our romance for a time in the past when a long distance phone call was that big of a deal, and people had to, conduct themselves in certain ways, and families extended themselves in these ways and made these sacrifices for each other, and on and on. And I mean, that's the love we're supposed to care about, more than the love of any pair of people in the movie.
And it really does make it unique, because you're right. Typically, an American film musical will end in an implied marriage of some kind. And that's true here. The couples come together at the end. But what matters is that they all went to the fair. That's really what we're looking forward to, not any kind of coming together of bridging differences between men and women, as is typical of Astaire Rogers films, for example.
I mean, it's really the sort of the prize of this movie, the success, the thing that is achieved at the end, is that the family gets to do the thing they've been looking forward to doing for a year, which is, if you think about it, all about, a return to a life when you could make plans and didn't have to worry about, a world war being fought on faraway continents, determining that you won't have any sugar or won't have any metal, or, that your husband leaves to go to the service, or you have to go work in a factory, whether you want to or not, or whatever. Just like, we all have things that we all took for granted that would just happen every year. And we've all had things in the last 9 months that we planned and thought, oh, by the time that comes around, we'll be able to do that thing. And the family in this movie thought that was true until Dad gets his transfer. So not exactly the same thing as a global pandemic or a world war, but to those kids it was anyway. Let's see. Will, do you have a question or comment?
Yes, sir. First of all, I'm really enjoying this discussion. I think it's also important to factor in the setting at which this movie took place. If you look at it, 1904 World's Fair, right? So So around 1910, I don't know, I'd have to go back, back, back into my history, but around 1910, that was when World War I started, right? And everything in the world just got compacted. But if you look back, this 1904 World's Fair, this was an event that brought together all types of countries all over the world, 18 million people. And on the flip side of that, when you look at the time the movie was made, 1944, right, when in the midst of World War II and fear of Nazis. So if you I look at the movie makers side of it, and I think, okay, wow, we really need to go to a time now back to where we didn't have to worry about Nazis or wars. So I think the current events surrounding the world at the time had an impact on how this book and film were made.
Yeah, thank you, Will. I think you're right, and I think something that you said that adds an increased level of specificity to what I've been saying anyway, is I keep sort of talking about nostalgia in general terms, but implicit in what you're saying is this idea that it's nostalgia for a time when things were far away and the world was bigger, and that helped make the that World's Fair so much more special, right? And these people are thrilled that the world's attention is going to be on St. Louis at this time, when in 1944, people wish the world wasn't, what happened in the rest of the world didn't impact the US as much as it did. And now that's true as well. Now it just takes a handful of people getting on some airplanes, and now we have this thing, right? So that is, it's not just nostalgia generally, it is nostalgia for a time when the world was a bigger place, even though obviously it wasn't literally a bigger place, and that's an important consideration.
Yeah, I think that that's really important what you said, for the reason that you put it prior to the First World War as well. And it's also a time when we are looking at technology, or at least in the version in this film, the promise of technology as a potential for doing amazing, beautiful things like a light show at a World's Fair, or allowing a conversation to New York to take place. How exciting is that? Rather than technology and its potential for destruction that people might be thinking of in terms of working in factories during the Second World War and what they're building in those factories and what's going on beyond that. So,
Arlene, you have a question or comment?
Hello. First
Yes.
of all, I'd like to compliment Jennifer. Her costume is beautiful with the virtual background that she has there, and certainly in the mood of the film, which have beautiful cinematography and lovely costumes throughout the movie. And it's one of my very favorite movies. I must have seen it 20 times. Thank you.
Oh, sure. You're welcome. Thank you. Let's see. Howard, do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the Halloween scene and just the overtones, if any, that you see with what's happening to people of the Jewish faith in Europe. And you'll recall that Tootsie goes to the home of this man who clearly has a German name, throws flour in his face, comes back to this group that's surrounding this fire. They're throwing things in the fire. And I think she says something like, I killed him. And I'm wondering if you see any relationship to what's going on in Europe at the time in connection with that particular scene.
I did notice, and I had forgotten this from past viewings, but I did notice just how much more Eastern European in origin the family that got the flower to the face looked than everybody else in the movie. And I noticed that in general, they, the things that marked that house and those people were things that often marked, well, I'll just say marked my family in our town, where we were among the very, 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 very few Jewish people, which was, we didn't have decorations out for the holidays that certain people put decorations out for their house. And we were sitting around doing other things on a day that everybody else thought was a really, really big deal. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I'm reluctant to say that it was intended to be a commentary on what the Nazis were doing to Jews and others in Europe, though I can certainly see why you would think that. The only thing that makes me say I'm doubtful is that I know that the studios tended to be wary of doing anything that would too closely identify them as being run or largely populated with Jewish people who were not, as a group, nearly as widely accepted in America in the 1940s as they are today.
I think sometimes, even if something's not necessarily intentional, there's a feeling that gets reflected in the texts that a group of people make. And the feeling of a critique of tyranny, like what happens when children get control of a gang of some kind. And this viewing of it in particular, I noticed the head boy of that gang and the way he was bossing everybody around. And you could see how that could get out of order really fast. And it gives the whole Halloween scene this urgency and kind of an undercurrent of, oh, I don't know, is this really going to be fine? I mean, they're encouraging violence. It's all play violence, but they're still encouraging violence in that way. So the reading that you've just given it, I don't really think is far off because of that tone that we get about what happens when people get power and what happens when a mob mentality kind of takes over a group. So even though it might not necessarily be an absolute direct intentional commentary on Europe at the time, there's still a critique, I think, going on in that scene. Although this kind of Halloween tradition did appear to exist in some parts of the United States. And
though, you know, I've only been a parent for the last, 5 years or so. It's been far longer than that I've known that, and Jennifer, correct me if I'm wrong, in general, you don't give kids fire, right? Is that right?
I haven't tried it.
Okay. But I'm right about that, right? It's generally frowned upon to just let kids start and add to a bonfire in the middle of the neighborhood.
With
right?
furniture.
Okay, yeah. Gotcha. Okay, good. I'm glad not that much has changed. Dana, you have a question or comment?
I have a little question. I think I'm bothered in this film that no one gets a character arc unless I missed something. I mean, maybe Tootie has moments where but there is a moment, and I don't want to overthink this, and I'm wondering, I'll share with you, and I want to hear what you have to say. There is a moment when Boy Next Door, Truett, has proposed to Esther, and of course she says, I will marry you. And then for a split second, she thinks about it and says, well, I'm going to New York and we'll be able to see each other and go from there and ... And then of course that gets left hanging because immediately after, Papa Dear decides to keep them all in St. Louis. And then we see the next beautiful scene where they're all in lace and they're at the World's Fair and Esther has stayed home. And I'm thinking to myself, was this almost on some level somewhere possibly an attempt to give Esther some growing up moment, or am I overthinking this? Did anyone else notice it? Did anybody else care about it? But it left me in that last moment when I'm looking at all of them standing there thinking, Esther, why didn't you go with that thought? Now that may be very today, but I don't know. It sort of left me with this feeling of Esther had her moment there of, I'm not really quite sure. So what do you think?
There's a generic reason why I think that this ending or that moment ended the way it did. And that is, this is classified. There's a guy, Rick Altman, he was my advisor in grad school, and he wrote a book on the American film musical. And this is a folk musical by his definition. And one of the characteristics of the folk musical is that love must happen close to home. And so if the family had gone away, then we no longer have that family to keep Esther safe, and the romance then can't blossom. Romances can only exist if they happen somewhere near the family home. And so for genre reasons, I think that ending has to happen, and that she has to make a decision, or the father makes the decision to keep them at home, but she wouldn't go away to New York or stay with the man. There has to be some other solution so they can both occur.
That makes perfect sense. That makes so much sense.
I think there was a song that was cut that they were both meant to sing together right after that. And then the movie was too long, and it was boys and girls like you and me or something like that. I don't actually know the song. I just read about it, that it had been removed from that scene, which might have made the scene play out in a way that made a little bit more sense as a resolution, I think, too.
I'm a bit surprised, but we appear to be out of questions and comments from our participants. So I think that we can end things a little bit early. Oh, wait, nope, I spoke too soon. Robert, you have another question or comment?
Yes. Jennifer, you talked about gay sensibility.
Yeah.
I didn't quite know what that meant, but I know it's important because I know that gay people were extremely influential, I guess, in Hollywood. So what did you mean by that?
What I mean by that is camp. So Susan Sontag wrote this famous essay called Notes on Camp in 1964, and a lot of other people have built on that. And in that essay, she calls camp a gay sensibility, which is just that there's a mode of performance and excessiveness. And I think I said in the introduction, a woman in a dress wearing 3 million feathers on herself, that where everything is so bad it's good, or everything has just gone a little bit too far, but it's all totally sincere at the same time. And part of what a camp sensibility does is to say to the audience, I recognize you as the audience of this. So there's a way in which Eve Koslowski-Sedgwick says, what if the audience for this was exactly me? A gay man would say that to himself watching a film like this. Recognition across a text that's produced in the style of that film. So that's what I meant. And there's a lot of people who have thought about that with MGM in particular and the Freed unit. And so when Judy is singing a song from the bottom of her heart and all the passion is coming out, but she's wearing absolutely perfect makeup and a gorgeous dress, and it's all totally posed and fake, and yet you feel the reality of that in her voice, there's a campiness to that that comes through. It's simultaneously performed and sincere.
And the musical, is a genre that's sort of tailor-made for that, given both the way performances interrupt what typically in Hollywood is a seamless story progression, right? There's a disruption there, but also even down to the production process, that these sort of numbers are kind of approached in a way separately from, at least during this time, from the rest of the film. And so there are a few reasons why the musical genre in particular is a good avenue for that sensibility.
Yeah. Sorry, go.
The other thing, Andrew, you mentioned Jewish people were also very active in Hollywood, Arthur Freed being one. Isn't there something to be said about a Jewish sensibility in some of these musicals and in Hollywood? I just think about Jews not feeling so secure, like you said. And I think we, as a group, we wanted to fit in more than anything in the world, fit in and just not attract attention to each other, ourselves as Jews. So I think that, but we were in Hollywood, and we wanted to, like Irving Berlin, he wrote a song about Christmas, and George Gershwin is writing this fantastic jazz kind of music, and we're trying to fit in. Isn't there something like that, a Jewish sensibility also?
Well, that's one of the arguments that's put forth about how the Hollywood sensibility and its view of America during the 30s, 40s, and 50s is in essence a Jewish sensibility because of the eagerness by most, though not all, Jewish people, but it would seem by and large by the moguls in charge of the studios to fit into America, to be considered quote unquote real Americans, despite being hinted at and it being told that they were not. So the notion that part of the reason that Hollywood movies during this time tend to take the view of America that they do is wrapped up with that, not just that desire to assimilate, but if we want to be open to a non-cynical reading of this, it's not commercial either. It is that part of the reason that the Warners and the Mayors and the Zukors, and that the part of the reason those people came to America is because they were run out of the places their families had been from.
Right.
And that to them, the ability to start these enormously successful businesses that were, appreciated by millions of people across the country, most of whom at that time probably didn't know any Jewish people or didn't know if they knew any Jewish people, they were genuinely grateful for that opportunity because their grandparents were being stabbed by people riding horses through their village. So, there is some sincerity and genuine motivation there for their view of America. I think it also happened to be good business, and I think that they leaned into it when they saw how good it was as an endeavor. But I think there was a lot of sincerity to it as well. Let's see.
Andrew?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Mention something that's been going on in the chat, which is that a few people have been commenting about the film being directed at women or about the intimacy of the way that the film is being shot. And I feel like women are also another group that we could talk about the film being directed toward, because I agree with the comments that some of the folks are making there, that there's a way in which getting to see these girls dancing around in their private moments with each other, these two sisters, when they sing Meet Me in St. Louis for each other, when they talk about their hair and their plans for the party in the bedroom, you can see a way in which the film really is addressing women, I think, in that moment right there. And whoever was it, a comment about it in the chat, I think you're right, that we're thinking about how to make films that women will enjoy as well. And this is one of those movies where we get to see those more intimate moments. And you get it in the dialogue too, because there's this great line when Tootie is lying, crying about getting hurt, and someone says, "Should we call father?" And the mother says, "What? Goodness, no, what would he do?" And so there's a way in which every part of the movie seems to be suggesting that the intimacy of family life is so much more interesting than anything that father could possibly be doing out there in his big important job, and that we're getting to look at these moments at home.
Right. I mean, this is almost entirely, I shouldn't say almost entirely, but overwhelmingly a private sphere movie, right? Mm-hmm. It is about the home and what happens in the home and the relationships among the people within the home, far more than it is, despite all the talk of what's going on outside, that ultimately isn't where the focus is.
And this happens in a few movies in this period. Since You Went Away is another big one where we're looking at the women on the home front and thinking about the value of home and family as a way of justifying and encouraging the war, or the Americans' participation in the war.
Maria, you have a question or comment?
Yes, hi, thank you. I am a local, and I am a music director for a theater group called Acting Without Boundaries, and it's a theater group for people with disabilities. And we have chosen this year to perform Meet Me in St. Louis for our fall show for next year. So we're really excited about that. And I'm really excited about this discussion because it's very serendipitous. I'm wondering if either of you know much about the kind of trajectory going from the film to the musical. I believe the musical was written much, much later, like in 1989. So it took a long time for this very musical film to be actually turned into a stage musical. But I'm wondering if you know anything about that kind of the process that it went through, or if you could speak to that at all.
I don't. Andrew?
No, I don't either. I know that there was, you know, I know that Hollywood was very good at taking pre-existing properties, even back to something like The Jazz Singer, and turning them into successful movies. What is less often focused on is when the stage goes way back in the archive. I mean, 42nd Street as a stage musical comes much later than the 1933 movie. And that's a similar thing here. And unfortunately, I don't know anything about it except that it's part of that. It's another element of that pattern. Let's see. Lee, you had another question or comment?
Yes, on the basis of the introduction, I tried very hard to find Love Me Tonight. I even bought Netflix because I thought Netflix would have it, but they don't.
They don't have anything.
And I very much, short of paying a lot of money for the DVD, can you give me any hints about how I could find Love Me Tonight?
Yeah, there's a really bad version of it on YouTube. If you really just want to see that scene, it's about 10 minutes into the movie. I don't know, Andrew, are you looking up if you can rent it anywhere else?
Yeah, I'm looking it up on justwatch.com, which is what we use for the link we provide for each week's. And it says it is not available anywhere. So yeah, YouTube then would be the best way to find it.
And would that have the whole film?
Uh-huh. The whole film's on there. It's just kind of grainy visual quality.
Okay, well, I'll try it then, because I was very interested in what you said about it.
It's a great film. We showed it at Bryn Mawr a few years ago, didn't we? I think
we
so.
did.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lee. Meredith, you had another question or comment?
Yeah, I'm just really interested in this idea of a sort of Jewish, gay, and sort of proto-feminist sensibility in which we're seeing women talking to each other and seeing women's intimate lives. And I just keep thinking about the house as like this space where people could do whatever they want, that they can burst into song, they can run around in their bloomers, they can be really free. And I think that's what's fascinating about this movie to me. And I just wanted to mention one moment that really resonated with me, because I just watched the Renee Zellweger film about Judy Garland. And I wondered in that moment where she says, like, her sister says your figure is wonderful. And she just says, I wish I didn't have to do it in a corset or something like that. Like, if we see her pushing back on the way that she's being manipulated by the studios, and I know that that's in the script, but it just felt really real. Like, why does she have to be artificialized in that way? And I feel like it speaks to, Jewish assimilation, and, gay people having to closet, and sort of all the identities that we've been talking about.
Yeah, that's a great comment. I always feel this way about everything Judy does. It's always like, it seems to always be her actual real self coming through that role. So it's easy to read it into that line in particular too. I agree with you.
Well, and I think you mentioned this in your introduction, Jennifer, that, Judy Garland was tired of playing teenagers. Yeah. And she was, I think, 21 when she made this movie. And she had a taste of some roles where she wasn't a teenager, and then this was going back to being a teenager. And she was reluctant to do it. And, that sort of trajectory it's a big deal because it's Judy Garland, but it was fairly common that all those sorts of, sacrifices, were made at the insistence of studios. Now, one could argue that if she had missed out on this part, she would have missed out on a whole lot of things professionally and personally. But the fact remains that the studio system was not a place, even for some of its biggest stars, to really flex their creative or personal, freedoms, because that's just what the system was designed for, and they weren't gonna allow it if they could at all avoid it.
And they resisted getting her the mental health help that she needed, that Mankiewicz, who she was involved with at the beginning of this movie, he loved sending people to therapy, and he wanted to send Judy to therapy too. And it worked for a little while, but she really needed a lot more help than MGM was willing to recognize.
William, you have another question or comment?
Yeah, so just to like further talk about the feminist point, I feel like that this movie really does a better job than a lot of movies today with actually sort of handling female sexuality. I mean, we get to see like the woman's gaze quite a bit in this movie with her, you know, mooning over the neighbor boy or seeing him in the darkness just as much as he sees her. So there's a lot more give and take, and just sort of also the whole discussion about whether to give him a kiss or not. It just feels much more honest and open than movies today.
This is such a good point, because even though that we're focusing, and in the chat too, on how young they are and how ridiculous the romances are, and they're only in high school, the women get what they want. You know, they manipulate this whole scene, and then they get the boys that they wanted to get from the beginning of the film, and the men seem to have very little say in what's going on. And even Mary Astor as the mother, she manipulates that situation to really get to stay in St. Louis in the end as well. We see it in how she starts playing the piano, and suddenly the father comes over and the whole family comes back in, and it's a subtle way of noticing that she's really controlling the scene there too. So I completely agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, the men are totally powerless in this film, and frankly, other than the fact that they're sort of placeholders to be objects of the desire of, you know, like Pruitt and Judy Garland, they have no impact on the story. I mean, the father ultimately, the one thing that was gonna, you know, change their lives, the father ultimately acquiesces on, and that's that. And it's interesting too, because from the very beginning, I mean, the way Katie talks to her employer is like, I mean, she's not having it. And he sort of blusters a little bit, but even it's almost like he knows that he's, you know, kind of ineffectual. But it's not that kind of movie, but it is interesting just how female driven this world is. I mean, even the juvenile delinquents are girls, right? In the family, right? I mean, and that's, you know, I guess what I just said proves what Tootie said, which is that police don't pay attention to girls. Well, when they try to derail a trolley car, they'll pay attention, I think.
Except as somebody points out in the chat, and William noted too in the chat here, there's the grandfather seems to be, as someone said, the superego of the house. And he is the one who's taking care of things, and he does affect the plot when he takes Esther to the dance. That beautiful scene. I cry every time at that scene. So there's grandfather there, but of course he doesn't have the same kind of authority that the dad or even the brother would have.
Yeah, no, right. The comment was that the grandpa and Katie are the superego, and Tootie's the id of the family.
Great comment.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for this discussion. As I said, we will be off next week, but we have a lot of options available in the Film Studies Online section of brynmarfilm.org, and we will be back the first Monday in January. Jennifer will be with us as well. So that means the Thursday before, I guess that's New Year's Eve day, you'll get an email revealing what the movie is that we will be discussing, and with a link, the most important thing, the link to Jennifer's introduction. No pressure, Jennifer, by the way. I don't know how you're going to top yourself, but just the fact that you make the introduction will put it at the top of the list, at least if my mother has anything to say.
And can I just make a comment here too to everybody? Sure. I've been so happy to talk with you all these 9 months and to volunteer to do these things for Bryn Mawr Film Institute. If you have the possibility to donate to Bryn Mawr Film Institute this holiday season, I would ask you to please do it if you can. I love this place so much, and I just really want I want us all to be able to come together again soon, but I want to carry on doing this with all of you too.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, as always, and thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in 2021. Things will have to be looking up. I think I can say that. And in the meantime, if you miss us next week, all 35 plus discussions that we've had are in our Film Studies online library. That even means that even the ones with Jennifer are in the library, and there are links to all of the instructor introductions, even the ones made by Jennifer. And if you think that the one for this week, if you haven't seen her others, this was her pièce de résistance, but there were shades of the creativity that you see in this one in some of the earlier ones, including other appearances by other family members as well. So there's always something to do in the Film Studies Online section of brynmarfilm.org. And we also have new movies available on Theater 5. So there's a lot to do. We wish you all a wonderful end of 2020 and a great start to 2021. And we look forward to talking with you and discussing movies in 2021. Thanks, everybody. And thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.